You have noticed it, everyone notices it. The price of bread goes up, the price of fuel goes up, the weekly shop costs more than it did 6 months ago. And somewhere in the background, there is a war happening. Most people accept the connection intuitively. War causes prices to rise. But the mechanism, the exact chain of events that translates bullets fired on a battlefield into higher prices on a supermarket shelf, that mechanism is almost never explained. This video explains it. 6 specific channels through which war drives inflation, each one distinct, each one documented, and each one operating whether or not you live anywhere near the conflict. Before the mechanisms, a definition. Inflation is not simply prices rising, it is the purchasing power of money falling. The same amount of money buys less. That is the phenomenon. War drives inflation through both sides of that equation. It reduces the supply of goods and services, so there is less to buy, and it increases the quantity of money in circulation, so there is more money chasing what remains. Both forces push in the same direction. Prices up, purchasing power down. Understanding which force is dominant in any given conflict tells you how severe the inflation will be and how long it will last. Channel 1. Supply chain destruction, the most immediate and most visible. Modern economies are built on global supply chains, interconnected networks through which raw materials, components, and finished goods flow continuously from producers to consumers. These networks are optimized for efficiency, not resilience. They assume peace. They assume open shipping lanes. They assume stable political relations between trading partners. War destroys these assumptions immediately. Shipping routes through conflict zones become dangerous. Insurance costs for vessels operating near active conflicts can multiply 10 to 20 times in days. Ports become targets. Bridges and rail connections are destroyed. Trade relations between belligerent nations collapse overnight. The supply shock that follows is immediate. Goods that were flowing stop flowing. Factories that depended on inputs from conflict regions cannot produce. Shortages appear not just in the conflict zone, but throughout the connected global supply chain. The price mechanism responds to shortage in one way: up. When supply falls and demand remains stable, prices rise to ration the reduced quantity of goods among buyers who still want them. The further a disruption travels through the supply chain, the more industries that depended on the disrupted input, the broader the price increase. A single disrupted commodity can drive inflation across dozens of downstream industries simultaneously. Historical supply chain disruptions during major conflicts produced commodity price spikes of 50 to 300% within months of conflict onset. These were not temporary blips. They persisted for the duration of the conflict and often beyond, because rebuilding supply chain networks takes years after the physical destruction that caused the disruption. Energy is the most critical supply chain input because it is an input into every other input. Energy powers the ships that carry goods. It powers the trucks that distribute them. It powers the factories that produce them. It heats the homes that need them. When energy disrupts supply, the cost increase flows through every sector of the economy simultaneously. Historical energy price spikes associated with major conflicts show the scale. Crude oil price increases of 100 to 400% during periods of major conflict-driven supply disruption have been documented. These energy shocks translate directly into higher costs for transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, and heating, raising the price of virtually everything that reaches the consumer. The mechanism is simple and inescapable. Higher energy costs raise the production cost of every good that uses energy in its production or distribution. Producers pass these higher costs to consumers. Consumer prices rise across the entire economy, not just in the energy sector. This is why energy disruption is the fastest and broadest inflation transmission mechanism in wartime. It requires no further steps. It raises prices immediately and universally. Channel 2. government spending and money supply expansion. As covered in detail in this series, governments fund wars through taxation, borrowing, and money creation. The money creation channel, where central banks expand the money supply to finance military spending, directly produces inflation through the most basic mechanism in monetary economics. More money chasing the same quantity of goods means each unit of money is worth less. Prices rise to absorb the expanded money supply. But wartime government spending drives inflation even without money creation, through a mechanism called demand-pull inflation. When government spending on military equipment, supplies, and personnel increases sharply, this spending competes with civilian demand for the same productive resources: workers, factories, raw materials. An economy operating at or near full employment cannot simply produce more military goods and the same amount of civilian goods simultaneously. Resources are finite. Redirecting them to military production reduces civilian supply. Civilian prices rise as the same consumer demand now chases a smaller civilian supply. This demand-pull mechanism operates regardless of how the government finances the spending. Even tax-funded military spending, the most honest financing channel, drives civilian inflation by redirecting productive resources away from civilian production. The supply of consumer goods falls, their prices rise. The combination of money creation and demand-pull inflation in major wartime economies has historically produced annual inflation rates of 10 to 30%. In economies where money creation dominated, where the printing press was the primary funding mechanism, inflation reached hyperinflationary levels, destroying the currency entirely. Wartime demand-pull inflation has a distributional consequence that compounds its economic damage. When governments compete with consumers for scarce resources, workers, factories, materials, wages in the military production sector rise. This attracts workers from civilian sectors, reducing civilian production further. Civilian prices rise faster. Workers who move to military production benefit from higher wages, temporarily, but those wages are spent on a reduced civilian supply, driving prices still higher. The wage increase is partially or fully eroded by the inflation it helped create. Fixed-income households, pensioners, workers on long-term contracts, savers living on interest, receive no wage increase. They face the full force of rising prices with unchanged nominal income. Their real purchasing power falls directly. This is the distributional pattern of wartime inflation. Those with flexible incomes and real assets are partially protected. Those with fixed incomes and cash savings bear the full burden. The inflation tax, like the money creation that drives it, falls most heavily on those least able to absorb it. Channel 3. Food supply disruption, the most socially destabilizing. Modern agricultural production is not simply land and labor. It is a complex industrial system that requires stable inputs: fertilizers derived from natural gas, fuel for machinery, functioning logistics networks for distribution, and secure property rights that give farmers confidence to plant and invest. War disrupts every one of these inputs simultaneously. Fertilizer production depends on natural gas, a commodity whose price and availability is directly affected by conflict. When natural gas prices spike due to war-related supply disruption, fertilizer prices follow. When fertilizer becomes unaffordable or unavailable, crop yields fall, food production contracts. Agricultural land itself becomes inaccessible in conflict zones. Farmers who cannot safely work their land do not plant. Harvests that do not happen produce no food. The supply shortfall is immediate and severe. Distribution networks that depend on fuel and functioning roads and railways collapse when fuel is expensive and infrastructure is destroyed. Food that is produced cannot reach consumers. Regional price differences become extreme. Surplus areas and deficit areas exist simultaneously because the logistics chain connecting them has broken down.
Historical wartime food price inflation shows the severity of these combined disruptions. Food price increases of 100 to 500% have been documented in economies severely affected by wartime agricultural disruption. Food price inflation is uniquely destabilizing because food is not discretionary. Households cannot reduce food consumption below a minimum without severe consequence. Higher food prices therefore translate directly into reduced consumption of everything else, compressing economic activity across all other sectors. The food, inflation, poverty chain is the most severe social consequence of wartime price increases. In lower-income households, food typically represents 40 to 60% of total expenditure. When food prices double, these households face an effective income reduction of 40 to 60% in real terms, because the same nominal income now covers far less food, leaving nothing for everything else. Higher-income households spend a smaller fraction of income on food, perhaps 10 to 20%. The same doubling of food prices represents a much smaller real income reduction. They adjust consumption patterns. They are inconvenienced, not impoverished. The food inflation channel therefore has a compressive distributional effect. It hits the bottom of the income distribution many times harder than the top. This is consistent with the broader pattern of wartime inflation. The costs fall disproportionately on those least equipped to absorb them. Historically, food price crises driven by wartime disruption have produced social and political instability that outlasted the conflicts themselves in regions far removed from the original fighting. Channel 4, Currency Depreciation. When war begins, investors and savers make a rational calculation. The conflict zone economy has become riskier. Government debt has increased or will increase. Inflation is rising or will rise. The future value of the currency is less certain than it was before the war. This rational calculation produces capital flight, money moving out of the conflict-affected currency into perceived safe havens. The currency depreciates, its exchange rate against major reserve currencies falls. Currency depreciation drives inflation through a direct mechanical channel, import prices. An economy that imports goods, fuel, food, raw materials, manufactured products, pays for those imports in foreign currency. When the domestic currency depreciates, the domestic currency cost of those imports rises proportionally. A 20% depreciation produces approximately a 20% increase in import prices. Economies that are heavily import-dependent see this price increase flow rapidly to consumer prices across all goods that contain import inputs. The depreciation-inflation cycle can become self-reinforcing. Rising inflation reduces the real value of the currency further. Investors respond by moving more capital out. The currency depreciates further. Inflation rises further. Each cycle compounds the previous one. Historically, conflict-driven currency depreciations of 30 to 70% within the first year of major conflicts have been documented, producing import price inflation of corresponding magnitude and accelerating the broader inflationary dynamic already driven by supply disruption and government spending. 6 channels: supply chains, energy, government spending, money creation, food, currency. Each one a separate mechanism, each one operating simultaneously, each one connecting a conflict, wherever it is in the world, to the price of goods in your local economy. The numbers on a price tag are never just about supply and demand in isolation. They carry the weight of every disruption, every monetary decision, every broken trade route that preceded them. Hit like and subscribe to FINOBOARD. In every video, we decode one financial system with real numbers and no agenda. Share this with one person who has ever wondered why prices rise when wars happen and never received a real answer.